Thank you for joining us for Section 3 of the APS Basic Skills Pre-Service Presentations. In Section 3, we will cover the 5027, an introduction to statistics related to APS, and the demographics of APS. I am Laura Gerganis, and I am a Program Coordinator for Adult Protective Services with the North Carolina Division of Aging and Adult Services. This presentation today is a general educational experience. It is not intended as legal advice or case-specific guidance, but rather is a basic skills overview. Specific cases can be discussed with a Division of Aging and Adult Services representative upon request through the listserv. While the guidance provided during this webinar is based upon information available during its development, the accuracy of its elements are subject to change based upon updates in law, administrative code, and policy. This presentation is intended to be viewed prior to completing the face-to-face classroom training and should not be considered a substitute for the entire Adult Protective Services training module. Welcome to Section 3 of Pre-Service. The objectives for this part of the presentation are for you to develop a baseline understanding of the 5027, some statistics we see in adult protective services, and the demographic trends in adult protective services. The 5027 is a critical document that follows throughout the life of the APS process. You must establish your knowledge of this document prior to opening your first cases. It is also helpful to understand the potential types of adults that you may deal with. Sometimes knowing those risk factors can better prepare you for the visits that you may conduct. We will now briefly cover the 5027. The 5027 is complex, and a deep dive into its contents will take place during classroom training. The 5027 is designed to do multiple things. In its most basic definition, this is how you open the adult for any number of services that are provided by the DSS. This form must be completed or updated each time a service is requested or terminated, when income eligibility is determined or redetermined, or where service policy requires notification to the client when a service is reduced. It is our documentation of eligibility for services, whether income is required or not. APS is a mandated service. We also utilize the 5027 to provide notice to the adult regarding an action that must be taken, or to provide them information regarding their rights and responsibilities. It also provides information on requesting and obtaining a fair hearing or for their appeal rights. The 5027 is also the authorization that service providers use to claim reimbursement for their services that are provided, so accuracy is paramount. This is how an agency bills their time and obtains their funding. The 5027 is the mechanism that a social worker uses to open a service client information record in the Services Information System, or to update the service client information in the Services Information System, commonly known as SIS. As we just mentioned, a 5027 is to be completed or updated every time a service is requested or terminated, when income eligibility is determined or redetermined, and where service policy requires notification to the client when services are reduced. When working with APS, there are 3 different codes. The first code is for intake of an Adult Protective Services report, Code 200. Which does not require a client identification number. The next code is for the evaluation phase of Adult Protective Services, which is Code 202, which does require a client identification number. And the last code is Planning and Mobilization, Code 204, also requiring a client identification number. It is essential that you read the SIS manual and learn what activities are covered by each code so that your time is billed appropriately. We will also go over these codes in depth within the classroom training. I am now going to review some statistics and demographics that will provide you with a baseline of the prevalence of APS, as well as some of the risk factors adults face in APS. Every year, the Division of Aging and Adult Services collects data from all 100 DSS counties. It is known as the Annual Adult Services Survey. There are a number of metrics that the counties report on, including how many reports were taken, how many were screened, how many were accepted, types of services that were provided, and many more. This data is critical in planning for budgetary needs, financial allocations, and keeping an accurate track of the service needs within our state. The fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. For fiscal year 2018 to 2019, which is our most current set of data available, North Carolina took 30,533 reports. Of those reports, 17,031 were screened in for evaluation, meaning that the report met all three criteria necessary to evaluate an adult for potential maltreatment. Of those screened in reports, maltreatment was confirmed in 7,103. 3,905 reports were substantiated. In classroom training, we will cover in detail how a report could be confirmed but not substantiated. This graph is a representation of the data we have collected throughout North Carolina since 2014. We are showing the trends between the number of reports, how many were screened in, how many were confirmed, how many were substantiated, and the different maltreatment categories that the report alleged. North Carolina sees an average increase of 2 to 5% of reports each year, with a 20% total increase since 2014. In fiscal year 2014 to 2015, there were 24,545 reports. 12,121 of them were screened in for evaluation. 5,406 confirmed maltreatment, and 3,160 substantiated the need for protection. Unfortunately, APS is also heavily underreported, and studies show that for every report made, anywhere from 7 to 10 reports are not. Anecdotally, North Carolina is seeing increases in exploitation referrals, referrals dealing with opioids, and referrals involving multiple categories of maltreatment. As trainings and community education have increased, so has awareness of referrals and reporting criteria. We continue to see increases in caretaker neglect as there are increasingly more children caring for their aging parents, as well as adult children with severe and persistent mental illnesses remaining in the home with their aging parent. Unfortunately, abuse can happen from anyone in a caregiver role. The data suggests that 80% of adults know their abuser intimately. In 60% of cases, the perpetrator is an adult child or spouse. Other abusers are family friends, such as neighbors or church groups, and business entities such as investors, attorneys, or financial advisors. There are also cases where the long-term care staff where the adult resides is the perpetrator. Although scary to think of just how many people could potentially have access to an adult, it is important to be aware of all of these possibilities, as they are all people that could cause maltreatment to the vulnerable and disabled. Unfortunately, we may never understand all the different motives perpetrators have for maltreating an adult. However, there are several categories that are more common than others. One of the most prominent motives is that of financial gain. This does not have to be for significant amounts of money. We have seen exploitation for as little as a few dollars at a time. A perpetrator usually just wants something for nothing. Mental health issues are, anecdotally, a large sector of perpetrators, and we are seeing it more and more with middle-aged adults still living with their parents. This causes a codependent relationship where the adult with a severe and persistent mental illness needs the parent to survive. It creates toxicity and gaps in basic needs being met. Caregiver issues, especially pertaining to power and control, are also large motives. We commonly see this in families where one family member takes over and other family members want more of a say in the adult's life but are blocked out. Conversely, sometimes those family members choose to be removed from caregiving, but still want an opinion in decision making. These all lead to unstable family dynamics, poor mental health in the adult, and at the most severe end, maltreatment of the adult. When reviewing the trends in data, the demographics tend to be fairly even between women and men, with slightly more than half being women. Older adults, or those over the age of 55, comprise the larger age data sets. Adults with a significant cognitive impairment are highly vulnerable as well as those who are dependent on others for their care. Recent loss is a major risk factor, especially those that are recently widowed. Adults with little to no social support are of particular vulnerability as they access fewer resources, attend fewer social events, and live as meagerly as possible. The last risk factors that we will talk about in this section are those that deal with the adult's dependence. Age at the onset of disability is of particular importance. An adult who has lived with a physical disability for most of their life usually has an easier time adapting to that disability versus someone potentially 75 years old with a recent amputation that has rendered them wheelchair bound. They usually have mobilized more resources and are more aware of the needs that they have surrounding that disability. This ties in with the adult's coping ability. Some adults simply do not do well when faced with new challenges and struggle to handle their basic needs. An adult's ability to mobilize resources also factors into their vulnerabilities of potential maltreatment. If an adult can mobilize their own resources or has appropriate and healthy supports to do so, then meeting their essential services are not as much of a struggle. Prior to moving into the sections for the Administration for Community Living and the LME-MCO presentations, you will now complete two activities that will tie in all pre-service sections to this point. It is incumbent upon you to locate this information and know where to find it. As a social worker, it is critical to know the key people in your agencies as it pertains to APS, and it's even more critical to understand how an APS record is set up in your county. Every county is different in how they approach this program, and taking the definitions you have learned as well as the policy will only further your baseline of knowledge. At this time, please complete Handout C, the Know Before You Go activity, as well as Handout D, the APS record review. Good luck. Thank you.